All right, welcome back to the workshop again. So today's episode is going to be an exciting one. There's going to be a lot more woodworking in this episode. We're going to be attaching the sides of the guitar to the neck block and the heel block, and also preparing and making the kerfing that goes around the sides to reinforce it. So stick around, it'll be fun. All right, well, let's start out by talking about the neck block. So the neck block is what the neck of the guitar directly ties into the body. So it's a really important joint in the guitar. And every source I've ever come across, whether it be books or video, every maker, pretty much without exception, does the neck block in a specific grain orientation. And that orientation is this, that the grain is running in the same direction as the sides are. So as the sides, they're glued into the neck block like that. And my understanding is that, due to seasonal changes, during humid months, the fibers will swell, and you're going to have a little instability in the vertical dimension. So as those fibers swell, they expand, and in the drier months they shrink and get smaller. So this block will actually be taller when it's humid, and when it's drier it will be shorter. So with everything running in the same direction, there's less strain on the glue joint there and things like that. Now, I say earlier that I don't think it makes as big of a difference as some people say it does, and the reason for that being almost all string makers, violins, cellos, violas, they have their grain orientation like this. So it's vertical. And I see some benefits to that. Like I said, the dimension where the fibers are running in is more stable. It's dimensionally more stable than this way due to that swelling factor. If you're a guitar player, you may have heard of the 12th fret hump, and that's just over time at that 12th fret juncture where the neck meets the body, it can raise slightly. I suspect it has something to do with these fibers changing over time, and you have that expansion and causing that hump to appear. So I would kind of argue that maybe you wouldn't have as much of that. You have more dimensional stability if that grain is running vertically, but who knows. But I do it the way all the other makers do, in case I'm identifying a problem or not identifying a problem that I should. So that's kind of what you have to be mindful of when you're making these. The grain orientation is somewhat important. I like using Honduran mahogany, matching the same wood species as the neck. I just like that it's one homogeneous piece, and it's tied together in that way. The swelling is similar and things like that over seasonal changes. When it comes to the heel block and the kerfing, I like to use Spanish cedar. Spanish cedar is not from Spain, and it's not a cedar. It's closer to mahogany, and it's sourced from Central and South America. The Spanish cedar is 30% lighter than the Honduran mahogany. So I like to keep things as light as possible. Some builders actually use balsa wood, but I like the Spanish cedar. It actually has a really nice aroma. I think that's why they called it cedar, because of the fragrance. And that is the same type of wood used in cigar humidors. It's resistant to mold and mildew. It has a fragrance that they feel imparts on the cigar as it sits and ages and things like that. So kind of interesting it's used for that. But I do use, like I said, the heel block out of Spanish cedar and the kerfing because it's lighter. So up next, I'm going to show you how I prepare the blocks, both the heel and neck block, and how I glue them into the sides. After that, we'll talk a little bit more about the kerfing. Here I'm just sanding the radius on the neck block, so it's the same profile that follows the shape and form of the upper bout. Just using a bench top sander for this. For the heel block, I do attach a 90-degree block on the backside just to help stabilize it and keep it straight and upright as I do the same profile for that. Here I'm gluing in the heel blocks to the sides. I've tried a few different methods of doing this, a few outside of the mold, I found that just doing it inside the mold with the spreaders exerting force on the sides just keeps everything nice and aligned and upright, and it works good doing it for me this way. So a lot of clamps for this step. So every C-clamp I have, I use for this. I start by putting a lot of pressure on the mold with that block just to keep it nice and upright and 90 degrees to the mold. And you may notice my apprentice lurking in the corner there. She really loves coming down to see the workshop. So she is watching this unbeknownst to me the entire time. Once those red C-clamps are in place, then I start to adhere the sides to the rest of the block. And once one side is done, you just flip it over and do the same thing to the other. For me in woodworking, glue-ups can be a source of some angst, especially in guitar making. I'm always expecting to hear a snap, crackle, and pop when I'm applying force and pressure on those delicate sides, but so far so good. So this is just me now marking the taper, going from the heel block to the neck block. There's a 3/4 of an inch difference or so between the upper bout and the lower bout, so I have a flattened piece of wood running across the two heel blocks, and then using this other piece of wood with a half pencil adhered to it to draw out that taper. And then from there I just start to shave down with the chisel to that marking line. I do the bulk of removal with the chisel and then followed up with a low angle block plane. I do that to reduce risk of tear out and things like that, especially with these figured woods or brittle woods. And I love any step in the build process where I can use hand tools. It's still a learning process for me. I'm no master by any means, but I just love using hand tools. It's so peaceful and cathartic. It's one of my favorite times in the workshop. Just no noise and just the sound of the tool and working things down to where you need it in fine increments. It's really fun. What I'm doing here is putting a radius on the guitar sides. All guitars have a curve to them, top and bottom, and I'm doing the back radius here. And the back has a 15-foot radius. So think of it as a 15-foot beach ball being placed into sand, and the impression in the sand is what that radius dish has. So as you're sanding down the sides, it's imparting that radius onto the back of the guitar. And radiusing the top and back does three things. One, the arch form that is created can withstand greater forces. So as I've discussed earlier, a guitar has a lot of force exerting on it, and that just strengthens the form of the guitar having a radius. And two, it actually directs sound better. So as the sound waves are reverberating around within the guitar body, that arch form, that radius form of the back helps reverberate the sound better and has more projection. And the third benefit is this is currently my only form of exercise, so that's a good thing too. Before gluing on the kerfing, I do one additional step, and that's the end graft of the guitar. This is just a decorative piece of the guitar. It looks kind of cool, and this is the jig that I use to make my end graft. There's probably a lot of better ways of doing that than I have here, but this is what I found works good for me. And I'm basically gluing on my end graft material onto my jig, and I'm using a flush trim router bit to trim that to the same taper as my jig. And you always want to try to pull against the rotational direction of the router bit so it doesn't grab it and pull your hand towards the bit. Of all the ways I've seen an end graft done with guitar making, I have developed probably the most awkward and cumbersome way of doing it. But it's worked for me. So I'm basically using the same jig that I use to router my end graft material. I use that as a stopping point to put up a fence. that I put up against the jig, and I'm going to use that fence then to be a guide for my saw to make the first cut. I always try to use hand tools whenever I can, and this is a system I developed in order to do it in a somewhat accurate way. So I'm pleased with the results, but it is a little awkward. So after making the 2 initial cuts with the saw to create the vertical form of the end graft, I make a lot of additional vertical cuts within that form, and then follow up with a chisel to start to clean it up and get it down to the Spanish cedar that is underneath. And that zirconia is definitely hard, brittle wood. It's more difficult to work than others I've had in the past. And you can see it's starting to clean up more. We're getting down to the final form. So after cleaning up the joint, we're going to do a test fit of the end graft material, and everything was looking pretty good, so it was good to go for the glue up. I do use epoxy for this step for 2 reasons. One, I don't like the form to be out of the mold for too long. It sets up really quick, and also it's better at gap filling. Titebond is okay with gap filling, but if there's any voids or anything present like that, epoxy really is best to do. The joint actually looked good, but just as a added precaution, I like to add a little bit of the grafting material, sawdust, over top of the glue. As you see here, I'm just going to put that over top just in case there's any voids, and that will fill in nicely. And then you just clamp it up and let it set for, this was 5 minutes, and it's cured. After curing, I'm just going to go over with the sander to get it nice and flush with the sides. And this is how it turned out. I think it looks pretty good, and this is with naphtha, which mimics what the final finish will look like. I think the more subtle binding scheme looks more elegant. I was contemplating doing maple binding, but I think the black ebony is a little bit more subtle, and I think it looks really great with the zirconia. All right, step 1 complete. The blocks are tied into the sides, so we'll direct our attention to the kerfing now. So this is guitar kerfing, and it serves 2 purposes. One is to increase the gluing surface area of the top and back to the sides of the guitar. So the sides are, a couple millimeters thick, so that's not nearly enough surface area to properly adhere to. So these add another, 6 millimeters or so of gluing surface to top and back. And it also adds a little bit of stiffness to the sides. And there is a particular way I glue them in that I feel imparts more stiffness to the mix. And in a couple episodes, I'm actually going to test that to see how accurate that is, how much better it is to do one way versus the other. That'd be kind of interesting, but I'll show you how I prepare the kerfing. So here's what traditional kerfing looks like, and I do what's called reverse kerfing that looks like this. I think it looks pretty sharp when it's done. Here I'm profiling the radius on the Spanish cedar board for the kerfing. So with each pass, it imparts this profile here, and every pass that I do this radius. And this is a really neat jig. I like this a lot. This makes really thin rip cuts possible safely. So you basically set the depth to what you want relative to the saw and take it away, and you just pass it through the saw, and it creates the really thin kerfing, or you can use a lot of different applications in woodworking, but it's a really safe way of creating thin rip joints. And this is a similar jig I use for the kerfing. So once I have my depth stop set, I start making the kerf cuts. And this is a very laborious process. It takes a long time, and this is all for just 1 of 4 that's needed for the guitar. Here I'm wetting the kerfing,
And what I'm going to do here is try to prevent breakage of that thin shell to the kerf. And to do that, I press the thin side of the kerf up next to the side of the guitar and let that dry. And that just helps hold the shape. So when I go to glue it, I then glue it from the other way, and that thin fiber of the kerfing is less prone to crack. Despite it being so thin, it's still prone to cracking if you just try to glue it in right away. And by supporting it, by pushing it up against the side, those fibers don't tear out as easily because of the support from the side. I let this set up for 10 minutes or so, and then it's ready for the glue up. Here I am beginning the process of gluing in the kerfing. I'm using fish glue because I like the long open time. It's always amazing to me just how little glue is needed to adhere these parts together. So a little goes a long way. You want to avoid a lot of squeeze out. There's just more cleanup to do. It looks nicer when you look into the guitar body. I don't like seeing a bunch of glue squeeze out. So your goal is to try to get just barely a little squeeze out, and more than that and it's too much. If you don't see any squeeze out, it can be a sign that there is glue that's unevenly spread across the glue joint, and you may have some voids or dry spots. Off frame, I just added some glue to the kerfing, and now I'm just placing it alongside the guitar, being careful not to let it crack. It still can do that, but with that pre-shaping we did before, it really helps. So just adding as many clamps along that kerfing to create even clamping pressure, and it's done.
All right, all done with the kerfing on the back. I just have to glue on the kerfing for the top. There's a little bit different preparation for the radiusing for the top that I'll cover in future episodes, but for now we are done. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm not super happy with how this glue up went. You know, you can't be happy all the time, but it will work, and ultimately it's fine. But I'll maybe discuss a few things with the kerfing that I don't like as much, but it's more aesthetically driven. But so far, so good. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll see you on the next one.